Okay, we're back at the Mamba Institute with Shodai Senin, and we're going to continue with a series of questions from our previous blog. So I noticed in your letter you mentioned specific statistics.
Mm-hmm.
Can you elaborate more on what they are and what do they mean?
All right. Well, generally speaking, statistics apply to populations. That's important for people to keep in mind, that when you're speaking of statistics, you're speaking of populations, you're not speaking regarding individuals. So they don't apply to individuals, they apply to populations. And what happens is when individuals get together, okay, there are certain emergent properties of those interactions that manifest themselves in these statistics. So statistics that are important, remember I was speaking about the future, the Hispanic community, the future of our nation, and one of the issues had to do with low economic status of the Hispanic communities in general. So here I mention on page 3, I say, here in the United States of America, the Hispanic or Latino, as some prefer, population is characterized by its low socioeconomic status as a whole. And here the statistic, $40,963 per household per year versus $58,270 for white non-Hispanics for households per year. This is in 2013. That's about 30% less. Now, what does that mean? Now, if they're making less, okay, that means that they have less to contribute towards taxes. Now, taxes are important because taxes are the fund that a government has to invest in infrastructure, invest in schools, invest in research, invest in its future, technology, science, etc. Okay, so if we're looking at 30% less in the Hispanic population versus the white population, we're looking at, and taking into account the statistical, the trends, population trends, okay, as the Hispanic population goes up in numbers, if these trends in terms of socioeconomic status, okay, continue as they are, that means we'll have less income for the pot, for in terms of coming from taxes, to invest into our future, invest into our education, invest into our infrastructure, invest in roads, invest in technology, etc., etc. That's important. Something important to keep in mind. Then I speak about, I refer to low academic performance. Okay, and low academic performance. I did mention the letter in the Huffington Post regarding California, but notice this: 33% of Hispanic students, this is in California, are proficient in reading in 3rd grade. 33% versus 64% of white students. Now, what makes America prosperous? What makes any nation prosperous? Okay, it's not how bright you smile. It's not what kind of a good person you are. It's not what makes, essentially it boils down to how smart you are. Okay? It boils down to inventions. It boils down to technology. It boils down to scientists, people that have the preparation, the smarts to solve problems, come up with new industries, which give new jobs, which makes us more competitive internationally. Without that, we're in trouble. Now let's go back to the statistics. 3rd grade, okay, reading proficiency. If you can't read, okay, you're in deep doo-doo, okay? So 33% of Hispanic students are proficient in reading in 3rd grade versus 64% of white students.
Now I see you rely a lot on statistics. How are those statistics stated?
Okay, hang on. Let me continue. By high school, 1 in 4 Hispanic 10th graders in California can't pass the high school math exit exam. So first we're talking about reading, now we're talking about mathematics. Okay, 1 in 4 Hispanic 10th graders cannot pass. That's 25%. Versus 1 out of 10 white students. So that's 25% are failing at math, Hispanic, versus 10% white students. You see the discrepancy?
Correct.
Okay, that's a problem. That's a huge problem. Okay, a couple of other things and then I'll get to the other point. So the other issue was The other issue was gang membership and relation to gang membership. So over the last 20 years or so, about 50% of members of gangs in the United States have been Hispanic. That's a significant part. Okay, that's almost 50%. They've sometimes been 50. I looked at the statistics of the last 20 years, and it's ranged from as low as 45% to as high as 50. But roughly, most of the average was nearly 50%. Nearly 50% of gang memberships were Hispanic. Okay, that's a huge problem. But then, a perhaps even greater problem is when you look at here that 3 out of every 10 young Latinos say they have a friend or relative who is a current or former gang member. Whoa, that's huge. We're not talking about they know somebody who's a gang member. We're talking about they have a friend or a relative who's a gang member. Now we're talking about gang membership as an integral part of a culture. Okay. The other point here is that I want to refer to is this business of babies having babies. Okay. Teenagers, young women, girls really, having 46.3% per thousand Hispanic girls between the ages of 15 and 19 having babies, compared to 20.5% per thousand non-Hispanic whites, or white non-Hispanic girls of the same age. That's huge. When you put it all together, you're looking at people. You're looking at a culture. Right, a group of people who are identified by culture. Language is a big part. Okay, and then when we talk about religion, we talk about custom. Okay, low socioeconomic status. They're not making much money. Why can't they make money? Well, if you're not big on education, what are your options? Your blue collar jobs, and those are drying up. Okay, or crime. Not surprising, big on crime. Not surprising that gang membership is a large affinity of gang membership in the community. Okay? And teenage girls having babies, what happens? Right? Those children are growing up without a father, more problems for the community. When you put that all together, what you have is a vicious cycle of no prosperity, no chances for prosperity, no chances for improvement. And where do you go from there? Crime. Crime is the answer. Okay, the war on drugs, there wouldn't be a war on drugs if it weren't so easy for people to sell drugs. Okay, 10-year-olds can sell drugs. So what we're looking at is a vicious cycle in amongst a community, I think, that happens to be, statistically speaking, the future of our nation in terms of population trends. Okay, I'm sorry, your other question was?
Well, actually, coming down to the question was, how does this affect Americans, the American society?
Well, okay, gangs. Now we can link gangs not only in terms of what happens inside America. Gangs are responsible for the vast majority of crime in the United States. Just look it up. You can Google that, and the FBI knows. So that's if we look at it specifically in terms of the United States, right there, that refers to a problem that's national. However, okay, we have to understand that the war on drugs is something international. And that's where we see a problem that is very unique to the Hispanic community and very unique, therefore, to our nation, the situation that we're in. I refer to the relationship between the Hispanic community and inside the United States and internationally. Okay. A lot of the drug cartels, which are the focus of our war on drugs, have ties to these very same gangs, largely Hispanic gangs. Not only Hispanic gangs, they also have ties to, of course, any gang that'll peddle their wares. But of course, their affiliation is going to be greater to gangs with which they have a cultural affinity. It's logical. Mm-hmm. So we have these drug cartels. We have transnational gangs, which I refer to, which originated largely in the United States, like the MS-13, the MS-18. So we have these drug cartels, we have these transnational gangs, and then we have our own gangs, our local gangs in the United States, okay, and we have these strong ties between them. So there's a steady flow of drugs that are coming in, and violence coming in from these drug cartels, South American border, and our local gangs are, as I mentioned, are their eyes and ears, their hands and feet in the United States.
Now, one of the questions, especially with this letter, that comes up with our readers in English, it states, why do you portray the nature of our problems as a cultural issue?
Okay. Now, I understand why a lot of readers, especially English-speaking readers, American readers, would ask that question. American culture, ideologically speaking, does not see the direct relationship between politics and economics and culture. It's something that we, for ideological reasons, we sort of put a barrier, okay, between politics and economics and culture. Okay, that barrier is fallacy. That is wrong. It's ridiculous. Okay? Now, and I can demonstrate that in any number of ways, and I've demonstrated that within the contents of this open letter. For example, establishing that when we look at most Spanish-speaking countries in Latin America, we see that they are either characterized as narco-states. A narco-state is a state whose politics and economics are pretty much dominated by drug trafficking. So they're either categorized as narco-states, or they are on the verge of this. Okay, now that's not a coincidence. That's not a coincidence. Okay, that is very much a cultural trend, or the result of cultural commonalities. So you have a series of circumstances that are common to all these countries, okay, that are cultural in nature, and so all of a sudden this economic opportunity, drug trafficking, your production, distribution, and sale of illegal narcotics pops up, and because of this the shared culture, the effect has been very similar. So we have pretty much from Tierra del Fuego all the way up through South America, the Amazon, all the way up through Central America, Mexico, and into the United States. What we have is a economic current, okay, based on this the sale of illegal narcotics, that is riding on some social circuitry or cultural circuitry, causing what I call the narco revolution. Now, if we look at, to further my thesis in terms of the cultural nature of this phenomenon, if we look across the Atlantic Ocean, and we look at Spain, what is the situation of Spain right now? Okay, well, the situation of Spain is scandal after scandal, political scandal after political scandal of corruption, and which has even made its way into the royal family. And what we have is Spain has been recognized as the portal for illegal narcotics into the rest of Europe. That's not coincidental. So we have Spain, which is the motherland of these other countries, and we have widespread corruption in Spanish politics. So it's not surprising that we have widespread corruption in Latin American politics. Okay, because there's a cultural affinity towards this kind of behavior that are reflected in the principles and values common to the culture. It's not surprising, for example, that the United States, having Great Britain as its father, okay, it's not surprising that the United States sort of took the mantle of empirehood from Great Britain. That's not surprising. There's no surprise there. It's a father-son relationship. Okay. Equally, it's not surprising that Spanish, the situation in Spain, would manifest itself and reflect itself in Latin America and in Latin American communities inside the United States. So, okay, sorry, just one more point. Now, many people emphasize politics and economics. They say, okay, well, the problem with these Latin American societies is politics. They're politicians. Politicians are the problem. Well, if their politicians were the problem, if it was only a matter of politicians were the problem, then once members of these communities, of these nations, okay, emigrated outside of those outside of the influence of the domain of these politicians, then their socioeconomic conditions would equally change. So if it were just a matter of politics, the politicians of their country, once they left the country and they went to the United States or Canada, for example, okay, then you would see some significant, and in terms of individuals, yeah, of course we do. We have individuals, Hispanic individuals, both in the United States and in Canada, that have excelled and sort of left behind those circumstances. However, when we look at general trends, what do we see? We see that these communities, Hispanic communities in the United States and in Canada, we see that statistics reflect third world country status. So it's not just a matter of the politicians, it's a matter of the culture itself. Now you can talk about chicken or the egg, which came first. It's irrelevant. It's really irrelevant. What's relevant is it's a matter of culture. So we have to deal with culture if we're going to solve the problem.
Okay, because what you quote on page 5 of your letter, this is very strong. What you quoted, you quote, Mexico is experiencing the worst crisis of violence since the revolution.
Right.
Why now?
Well, that has a lot to do with the war on drugs. I mean, once Calderon, the former president of Mexico, entered into office and under the auspices of the United States declared the war on drugs, okay, what happened? Well, there was a tightening of, there was a use of military and police forces to tighten up on the operations of these drug cartels and with ensuing violence, because they're going to make their money. You can't stop them from making their money. So all it did was cause a tremendous wave of violence, and we're experiencing in the United States with these, well, here it says, today rampant gang violence and wars between narcos are dislocating an increasing number of people from Mexico, Colombia, and Central America. That's the result of America's war on drugs. That's what they call blowback. Okay, that's what I talk about, reductionist myopathy. That's the problem with people thinking it's checkers. It's not checkers, it's chess. Okay, that's where they're only looking at a small piece of the board and they say, oh, wouldn't it be nice to move this piece over here? Because it's so beautiful over here. It's like, well, there's nobody using it. A bishop over here on this piece would look, oh, that's a great photo op. They're not taking into account the board. And that's been pretty much the standard for American foreign policy, okay, and domestic policy. Okay, narrow perspective, short time frame. I'm not looking at a broader time frame, broader perspective. So that's why now.
Okay, thank you. You have a question?
Okay, so let's take a break and we'll be back.